while we're waiting for more people, let's start to introduce today's talk. So hello everyone, I'm Tianqi Wei, and welcome to the 6th online talk hosted by the Doctorate Association. Please note that this talk will be recorded. The Doctorate Association is a politically independent, not-for-profit organization. It is a global platform that helps doctorate students and scholars to participate in local communities, supporting them in academia, entrepreneurship, career planning, and cross-cultural communication. If you are interested to plan to have a startup, it will be really important to know what service the local government can provide to support your business. And if you want to do it in Scotland, don't miss Edinburgh. Edinburgh has one of the strongest entrepreneurial ecosystem in Europe. Today, we have Jim Galloway to give you an inside view of how Edinburgh achieved it, along with his career in the local governments. Jim Galloway is a core person who led the revision of the city government's approach to business development support services. He was a former head of enterprise and innovation in the City of Edinburgh Council. In 2019, he established Edinburgh Global Limited and continued to promote and take forward Edinburgh's international ambitions by providing his services to international delegations visiting Edinburgh and Scotland. He's an advisor to the Lord Provost of Edinburgh and also a director of the Doctorate Association. Would you please welcome speak today, Jim Galloway.
Thank you very much, Tianqi. Can everybody hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
You're hearing me. Okay, so thank you very much for that introduction. And thank you for the opportunity to present to you some of the ideas and some of the actions I took forward when I was Head of Enterprise and Innovation with the City of Edinburgh Council. It's my honour and privilege to be speaking to you today. So thank you for taking the time on a pleasant Saturday afternoon to listen to me. So my name is Jim Galloway. I'm the founding director of Edinburgh Global Limited. I'm also a director of the Doctorate Association, and I'm a close colleague and brother to Dr. Giang To Ma, one of the founders of the Doctorate Association. I'm also a director of the Turkish-Scottish Chamber of Commerce. I'm a area leader for the Federation of Small Business in Scotland, and I'm a member of the Institute of Directors. In terms of academic qualifications, I have a Master of Science degree in Local Economic Development. I'm not a doctorate. I've not undertaken a PhD, although I was invited by the Napier University of Edinburgh to undertake a PhD. And perhaps sometime in the future, I may decide to do that. But at the moment, I'm a Master of Science degree holder. So really, a key question here is, who is Jim Galloway? Why is he speaking to you today? So if I was asked to describe Jim Galloway, I'm not a PhD, but I am, I believe, an entrepreneur. Now, entrepreneurs, there's a big debate, which I've listened to many times, about whether entrepreneurs are a natural occurrence or whether they're nurtured. Is it nature or nurture? And in my case, it certainly was, I was nurtured as an entrepreneur. So I'm going to start my presentation now. Just let me share my screen and go to PowerPoint and share. And here we go. So here's our presentation, all about Edinburgh and how it became the entrepreneurial city of the year and my modest part in achieving that. And it's not going to want to move. So let's just move it this way. That's it. Okay. So Edinburgh is independently assessed as one of Europe's most successful entrepreneurial ecosystems. And I had a part in achieving this. But where did it all start for me? Well, my background is a long story. But for those who study genetics, they may have been inspired by childhood interests in pets. And my entrepreneurial journey began when my grandfather and father started breeding white mice. Shortly after World War II in 1946, aged just 13, my father started selling white mice to his friends at school. Some of the friends then needed boxes to keep the mice in at home. So grandfather and father started making little boxes for mice and selling mice. And they made these boxes out of discarded orange crates and other wood that they could find. And so began our family business. By 1957, my father had grown up into a man. He had married my mother and they established the pet shop. 75 years later, the pet shop is still going strong. It's a small business. It's run successfully for 75 years. My brother, Kenneth, now runs the pet shop and my parents have retired. So I was raised quite literally in a pet shop. My preschool years, under the age of 5, were spent at my mother's side, behind the counter in the pet shop. And one of my very earliest memories was sometimes when the pet shop was busy, my mother would lift me because she was too busy to look after me and put me in a converted playpen, which was full of puppies that were for sale. So I was raised quite literally in a pet shop. When I was old enough, I would help alongside my brothers to fill bags full of pet food ready for customers to buy. And from aged 10 onwards, I worked every Saturday with my family in the pet shop. So why do I tell you this? Well, I was raised in an entrepreneurial household. I learned very early in life that if you wanted something, and if you wanted something more, then you had to work hard for it. My parents worked hard, and we knew that if the pet shop was doing well, and customers were spending plenty of money on their pets and pet supplies, then we would get the things that we would need. And if the shop wasn't doing well, and there were times, like any other businesses, when it didn't, then sometimes we would have to go without. So at an very early age, I worked out to succeed in life, to get what you wanted. And if you wanted more, you had to work for it. One memory sticks out quite vividly for me. I was at school and I needed a rugby top for school. The official one with the school logo and in the school colours was very expensive. And maybe that week, the pet shop hadn't done too well. And my mother bought me a flimsy t-shirt with this awful cartoon bull on the chest and said, "That's what you've got." So I went to school in this flimsy t-shirt with a picture of the bull on the front, and all the other boys laughed. And even the rugby teacher laughed as well. And that was a hard lesson to learn. So what did I do? I worked hard. I earned enough money to buy the rugby top myself. And I bought it. That was an early lesson that if you wanted more than what you're given, then as an entrepreneur, you have to find a way to make the money to do that. Everybody expected that I would go to work in the family business. And I did for a while. But my eldest brother, Stuart, he didn't work in the pet shop. He studied at university and got a degree in photography and filmmaking. And he went on to work in London in films such as Superman with Christopher Reeve. I was inspired by that and a love for the cinema. And at the age of 16, I got offered an apprenticeship as a cinema projectionist. I took the job. I left school early before completing all my exams because I thought I'd got the dream job. It was really quite good actually to start with. I got to see all the films for free. But it was a mistake. In retrospect, I became very quickly very bored with the situation in the cinema. Again, I wanted more. I'd missed out on high school. All my friends from school had gone to university. They progressed to successful careers. Meantime, although I got to see all the films, I was in a dark projection box. I even very rarely saw daylight. So by 1983, when I was 21, I made a bold decision. Around about that time, unemployment was at its highest point in Scotland. Margaret Thatcher was battling the trade unions, threatening manufacturing across the whole of the UK, and was closing all the coal mines, devastating local economies, including that of my hometown, Kirkcaldy. And it was at that particular time that I decided to leave what was really a secure job in the cinema and go back to school. I have to say, my father thought I was mad. But the truth was, I wanted more. My entrepreneurial side had woken up. So after 2 years in a mature student's course, I gained the kind of qualifications that I should have studied for in high school. I managed to catch up with my friends and I sought out a new career for myself. Excuse me. I became very interested in local economics. I was inspired perhaps by another famous son of Kirkcaldy, my hometown, who was born in 1772 in a house next door to where my family business, the pet shop, is now located, and that's Adam Smith. Adam Smith was a famous philosopher and economist who wrote The Wealth of Nations. I think it's just a coincidence that I was born in the same town as Adam Smith, but I became an economist. I was very discontent with what I saw happening in my hometown. I became politically aware. Thatcher and the Conservative government was undertaking a laissez-faire approach to economics. She felt that the National Coal Service was not making enough profit, and she just closed them all. This led to Seafield Colliery in Kirkcaldy closing. Thousands and thousands of men across the country lost their jobs, lost their income. Unemployment rocketed up to close to 30%. And it was at that time I sought a job with the Chamber of Commerce, and I was taken on as a junior training officer in 1987. And that was the beginning of my proper career, a career in local economic development. Fife Chamber of Commerce was a small organisation which represented the business community in Fife. As a formally recognised Chamber of Commerce, its primary function was to act as a membership society for business owners and worked closely with local government to provide key business-related services. One of the services was its training division, and that was my first job. National government at the time, still led by Margaret Thatcher's Conservative administration, adopted an active labour market policy, which for the first time placed a burden of responsibility on long-term unemployed people to actively seek work in return for their benefit. So with general unemployment amongst adults running at over 12% and youth unemployment running at close to 30%, the government introduced a number of new training programs, including a program called Employment Training for Adults and the Youth Training Scheme for 16 to 18-year-olds, fondly remembered by people of my generation as the YTS. So the YTS program became a default compulsory program when the government at the time ended any unemployment benefit for anybody under 18 years old. This was in the early 1980s. So in order to receive anything from the government, young people had to participate in training or education. So I joined the Chamber of Commerce as a YTS supervisor, and I was kind of fresh-faced myself. I was only 25, and I didn't look much older than the YTS did. So sometimes it was difficult to tell the supervisor from the trainee. I was employed by the Fife Chamber of Commerce to find employers who would be willing to take on young people. Now, quite literally, I was thrown in at the deep end. I was just given a copy of the telephone directory and asked to start phoning building companies who might take on young people. So the job was tough. Not many employers at that time wanted to take on new employees. Often, once I found an employer that was willing to take on a young person, that young person wouldn't want to work there. So I spent most of my time solving problems that arose between the employers and the young people. Again, I wanted more. My inner entrepreneur spotted an opportunity. One of the few growing industries in the 1980s in Scotland was domestic double glazing. There were grants available from local governments to householders who wanted to upgrade their windows. And most people wanted to upgrade their windows. So it became a boom business. Now, despite that, there was no recognised training qualification in Scotland for double glazed window manufacturing or installation. So I set about working with two of the largest double glazing companies in Scotland to introduce new qualifications. This took about 2 years to get in place, but once it was in place, it earned me a promotion, a pay rise, and brought me in contact with local and national government officers and politicians. So again, I wanted more, I put in extra work, and I got more. Soon, I moved on to local government, and in 1992, I started working for Fife Council. I spent 7 years at Fife Council. Whilst there, I worked in vocational training, still with young people, but I was then promoted to head up one of their VOTEC units. Now, a VOTEC unit is a vocational and technical training centre, and it was specially purposed for young people with special needs. These are notable special needs because of some kind of physical disability, some kind of mental health issue, and then there was a third category, which was there was nothing medically wrong with them, there was nothing psychologically wrong with them, but they just had a very bad attitude. So it was a difficult client group to work with. And, you know, the vocational training unit was quite successful. It had various different departments. It had a sewing section for girls. It had a mechanics section for boys. Used to do some basic manufacturing. But to me, looking at it, it was just an accommodation for these young people. It didn't give them an opportunity to progress. So I kind of wanted to do more once again. So what I noticed was that the young people had very low levels of literacy and numeracy. And I had heard of a new concept called work-based literacy and numeracy. So I worked with the national organisation, Cities and Guilds, to introduce a new system of learning which allowed the young people to improve their literacy and numeracy whilst working in a normal workshop environment rather than a classroom. And it was quite a big success. But I learned something interesting about myself during that process. Because we were going to be working with young people with low reading skills, the Dyslexia Association came in and gave us instructions on how to test the young people for dyslexia. And during that session, we took tests ourselves. And the person from Dyslexia Scotland took me aside and said, "Can I have a confidential word, Mr. Galloway? You're showing up as being dyslexic." And it was a revelation to me because, you know, looking back, I had struggled in school. I had sought an early release from school and went to the cinema. And, you know, discovering that at that time was quite a revelation, as I say. So Jim was dyslexic. In the 1960s in Scotland, dyslexia was not recognised. Children who struggled in school were just considered slow or stupid. And that was me when I was a young boy in primary school, aged under 10. I was labelled as slow and stupid, but I knew that I wasn't. And I always wanted more. Anyway, let's move on. In Fife Council, I was doing really well. And the bosses recognised my potential, unlike the teachers at the school when I was a child. I was promoted once more and I became a local economic development officer, moving out of training for young people to supporting businesses in the community. The council also enrolled me in my Masters of Science degree at Napier University. And then shortly after that, I moved to work in Edinburgh. Now, Edinburgh is, for anybody that's visited Edinburgh, is a beautiful city. It's a fantastic city. It's a city of opportunity. And that opportunity presented itself to me. And I rapidly moved through the ranks and was rapidly promoted. My entrepreneurial flair came to the surface once again. In 2001, I was promoted to team leader following a series of successful applications for national funding and European funding. And I established my first team of 12 colleagues. By 2008, I had quadrupled my salary and I was promoted to head of enterprise and innovation. I had a team of 35 people working for me at that time, but it would grow to over 100 in the fullness of time. I was put in charge then of establishing better services for businesses in Edinburgh. Now, perhaps, we get to the main part of my talk today, how I helped establish Europe's most successful and well-connected entrepreneurial ecosystem. And it all started with white mice. So, Edinburgh is an inspiring city. It was the the seat of enlightenment in the 18th century. During the 18th century European Enlightenment, great thinkers such as David Hume, Adam Smith, Sir Walter Scott, and even our national poet, Rabbie Burns, all mixed and created new ways of thinking, new ways of looking at the world, new ways of economic planning, and new forms of art emerged. And it was called the European Enlightenment. Oh, to have been alive in those days. It must have been fantastic. Today, Edinburgh continues to be an inspiring capital. It's home to the Scottish Parliament. It's the capital city of Scotland, a nation that perhaps one day might be independent, perhaps not, but that's another debate. But debatably, it is the seat of a new enlightenment, an enlightenment that I would call maybe 2.0, a digital enlightenment. Through the work of the universities, and particularly in institutes of the University of Edinburgh, Edinburgh is pushing the boundaries of data innovation. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. It's regularly voted as one of the best cities in the world to live, work, and study. Why is that? Well, it's a fun city. It's the home of Hogmanay, of New Year, perhaps almost as famous as Chinese New Year. It's a world festival city, debatably the most successful festival city in the world. It's been impacted by the COVID pandemic, but it's bouncing back. Already this year, the festivals are back, and Edinburgh is beginning to waken up again. But above all, to me personally, it's a city of entrepreneurial opportunity. So in 2008, I was thrown into the role of Head of Enterprise and Innovation. I was asked to look at the systems, processes, and programs that were in place to help businesses develop from startup right through to investment and internationalization. Now, I found that there were many providers of different services, and it was just like the picture. All the pieces of the jigsaw were there, but they weren't assembled in the right order. So I had a bit of a job on my hands, I think, to build a better picture and put everything in place so that the picture made more sense. At that time, Scottish Enterprise, Scotland's national enterprise agency, oversaw a whole range of business-related services. At a local level, there was a programme called Business Gateway. And then in Edinburgh and across all parts of Scotland, there was the local government. And the local government provided a range of services, including regulatory services around licensing, planning, building control. There were universities, of course. Edinburgh is home to 4 world-class universities. Each of them had business schools. Each of them had entrepreneurial programs, but they were not joined up. And in many cases, they were competing for the same outcomes and the same outputs. So none of these services were really all that joined up. Business Gateway, in particular, is a free service. It's targeted at business startups. and early stage growth. It provides basic business planning advice and a series of workshops and training events. It was popular with clients and much valued. However, it operated independently of Scottish enterprise, local government, universities, colleges, or anything. At that time, Scottish enterprise provided contracts to contracted providers across the whole of the country to put Business Gateway in place. The nature of those contracts were based on outputs. So a contractor would bid, for example, to provide Business Gateway in Edinburgh, and Scottish Enterprise would provide them with a contract. But the only way for the contractor to earn money was to be able to say, I supported X number of new businesses to start up this month. Then they would get paid £300 or £500 per business startup. Now, what happened in Scotland at that time was that the contractor's behaviour was driven simply by monetary outputs, and there was no qualitative measure for the Business Gateway programme. I saw that as a significant weakness, and it is a significant weakness in any business strategy, simply to be focused on the numbers and not on the quality of your output. What I saw as the major challenge at that time was to converge, bring together the different operators in the various different theatres of activity so that they became much more combined, much more joined up. Again, a reference to jigsaws. We needed to get the jigsaw puzzle pieces in place, showing a clear picture to business people about how to start up and grow your business. At that time, because I'm an entrepreneur and I always want more, I had joined the Scottish Local Economic Development Group. This was an organisation that sat outside of the local authorities, but represented each of them from an economic development point of view. And I had reached the stage of becoming vice chair of the Scottish Local Economic Development Group. That put me in a position of influence at national government level. I had several meetings with Scottish government ministers, and I pointed out to them what I saw as the flaws in business support services, both from a Scottish national perspective and from a local perspective. So that led to me being put in charge of the Business Gateway National Review Board. I became the chair of that grouping, which was a Scottish government look at business services. So through a series of intense negotiations, and they were intense, and against some considerable opposition from the contractors that were providing Business Gateway, because they had a vested interest in getting the numbers and getting the contract value, I successfully argued that Business Gateway should be transferred from Scottish enterprise control to local government control. In 2009, the Deputy First Minister at that time, John Swinney, announced the outcome of the National Government Review and confirmed that Business Gateway would transfer to local government. This was a major victory for me and for the Local Government Economic Development Association, and it brought just over £15 million worth of funding to local government. It was a major victory. This move allowed me to bring Business Gateway in-house to the local government offices. So in 2010, I established the Edinburgh Entrepreneurial Business Development Hub. It was in the main entrance to the council's headquarters, and for the first ever time, it brought together the Business Gateway service, which was focusing on business support, business startup support, alongside the regulatory services like planning and building standards. This had a twofold beneficial effect. Business customers were no longer confused about where they should go for business support. And they would be able to access regulatory services at the same place. And at the same time, again, for the first time, regulatory services such as planning and building control and licensing began to see themselves not as gatekeepers and wardens, but as business support professionals. And they began to see their function as as important as Business Gateway in enabling businesses to grow, become established. This was another first at that time, and still to some extent, businesses see regulatory services such as licensing and building control as barriers to starting business, because they say, I've got an idea, and the council says, no, you can't do that. But now, because business support and regulatory services are working in the one team, it's much less likely that the regulatory services just say, no, you can't do that. They'll say, well, maybe you can do that, but you maybe have to change your plans slightly, and they work together, and there's convergence. So that was a major success. Next, I turned my attention to the creative industries. Believe it or not, even though Edinburgh was the centre for global acclaim as a festival city, there was nothing in place to bring together the creative industries sector. We knew that at that time there were around about 20,000 people working in the creative industries. But my director at that time, who is now been promoted to work as head of economic development in Westminster in London, he said to me, you know, it's strange, we're such a festival city, but we don't know much about the creative industry sector. Can you think, you know, go do something about that, Jim? So again, I had a look. I thought, well, what do we need for creatives? You know, because creative people in the creative industries are different than other entrepreneurs. Many are artists and don't necessarily always think of themselves as business people. So I came up with a simple but effective strategy that I thought everybody could understand. My strategy for the creative industries was simple: people, place, and pound. Let me talk about that. At the time, in 2010, there was no one organisation that represented creative industries in Edinburgh. And very frequently, we got visitors to the city, you know, big delegations, often from China, but, you know, from all over the world, other parts of Europe and America. And they would phone the council and they would say, I want to speak to the head of the creative industries. And I would say, well, who's that? You could put a call out across the city and there would maybe be 10, 15, 20 people that would claim to be the head of the creative industries, but they weren't, you know, not in my estimation, because they only represented their part of the creative industries. So what did we do? Well, what did I do? I thought, let's start a new organisation that represents all of the creative industries. And I did a search on the computer as you can do, to say, has anybody registered Creative Edinburgh as a, and I discovered, much to my surprise, that there was already an organisation called Creative Edinburgh Limited. It already existed, and it had been established by Scottish Enterprise. Remember, Scottish Enterprise, the national organisation for economic development. So I got in touch with Scottish Enterprise, and I found that they had mothballed it. They had put it aside because it hadn't been a success. I asked them why had it not been a success, and they said they couldn't find any members. I said, that can't be the case. There's 20,000 people working in the creative industries in Scotland. She says, oh, well, we only wanted to speak with the high growth ones. We only wanted to speak with the ones that had an international profile. We only wanted to speak to the ones that were a success. Crazy. I managed to find two fantastic directors for the new and revitalised Creative Edinburgh, two young women who worked in the creative industries, Lindsay and Janine. And they reinvented Creative Edinburgh. Creative Edinburgh became so much more than just a network. Creative Edinburgh became about people coming together and sharing the joy of creativity. They established a range of activities, and Creative Edinburgh, believe it or not, became the fastest growing creative hub in Europe. At a starting point of 2010, they had me, some funding, and two people. By 2016, they had over 4,500 members. They had established Creative Corporate Love, where creatives went into big corporations and started to talk about creativity. They established Talking Heads, where famous people, celebrities from the creative industries came and talked to fellow entrepreneurs. They established the Creative Hub Kit, which was then used by other areas to establish their creative hubs. So next I looked at place, and we did a mapping exercise in the city to see where all the creative space was. And you can see this word wall. There was a tremendous amount of space available to creatives, but nobody knew where to go. There was nothing collectively bringing them together in a directory that could be easily understood by entrepreneurs who wanted to set up a creative industries business. Also at that time, we're talking about 2010. It was 2 years after the financial crash, so we were in a depression. This fantastic building that you can see here on the screen had sat empty for 5 years. And we found through our place survey that although there was places for people to go and start creative businesses, they were unaffordable. So again, I took a bold step as an entrepreneur. I persuaded the City of Edinburgh Council to take a 5-year lease out on this fantastic building that you can see. And I established what was called the Creative Exchange. The Creative Exchange was a place for making. It was a place for being creative. It allowed co-working in a creative environment, and it flourished. Over the 5 years that it was open, it supported over 300 businesses to start and grow. And it saved the building from going into disrepair. Further, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, it was twinned with a creative exchange in Shenzhen and became an international creative exchange. Also around about that time, perhaps inspired by what we were doing with People, Place and Pound, other people within the private sector and the public sector began to emulate what we were doing with space. An entrepreneurial spark a project that started out in Glasgow, established their second accelerator programme here in Edinburgh. After a number of years' success, the Royal Bank of Scotland took over Entrepreneurial Spark, brought it into their corporate headquarters in Edinburgh. Now, this is their global headquarters. Again, after the crash, the banks had been humbled, and they made their executive suite, which had housed their chief executive and all their fancy directors, and they gave it over to the entrepreneurial community. Quite some coup. And I had a part in that, because for the first 3 years that Entrepreneurial Spark was in Edinburgh, before they moved into RBS, it was the council and my budget that provided them with space. And another example of the place strategy, which was nothing to do with me or with the council. This is the former veterinary school in the University of Edinburgh, a building which was no longer fit for purpose, and the university took the bold step to move the veterinary school to an area just outside the city, leaving this building vacant. So one entrepreneurial philanthropist bought the building and gave it over to the arts community. An amazing piece of philanthropic giving and a big risk. I have to say, I thought he was taking on too much at the time, but he proved me wrong, and I was happy to be proved wrong, because giving this building over to the creative industries revitalised it, and it proved that Creative Edinburgh, as a people network, could take that step, because Creative Edinburgh became central to the success of Summer Hall. They then were able to regenerate that place, if you like, and it's now a thriving centre, and it still remains a thriving centre for creativity. Another example, this was former disused arches in a street in Edinburgh that was owned by the council. Again, as part of our place strategy, as part of the awakening of the creative industries and entrepreneurial drive behind that, these disused, damp, horrible, graffiti-filled arches were converted into fantastic entrepreneurial spaces for small businesses. And then the third part of our creative industries strategy was the pound strategy. The council continued to invest in creativity, just over £5 million invested in the festivals by the council. But that's facing significant challenge, especially now post-pandemic, where resources are needed elsewhere. So we've had to look further afield. So there are systems being discussed, including a transient visitor levy, where each visitor to the city pays an extra £1 per night for their hotel accommodation, and that £1 goes to the creative industries. That could generate somewhere in the region of £44 million per year. Philanthropic giving is on the increase, but again, that has been challenged over the last 2 years because of the pandemic. And corporate sponsorship has, to some extent, replaced some of the government funding that's been in place for some time. Also, as part of our strategy, we looked to support more joined-up business support specifically for the creative industries. And we brought Cultural Enterprise and Business Gateway together. These were, again, two separate organisations which were funded by two separate government departments, and we brought them closer together. And that led to some success with our gaming and digital economy sector. So all of a sudden, we found that companies like FanDuel and Skyscanner, who became unicorn companies with a value of over $1 billion began to emerge very rapidly within Edinburgh. And so to the more academic part of my talk, and I realise that I've been, we're at 10 to 2, so I'll try and speed up a little bit. In 2014, I was approached by this chap, Dr. Ben Spiegel, a Chancellor's Fellow from the University of Edinburgh, based in the Business School and the Centre for Entrepreneurship. Ben, at that time, was researching Edinburgh's entrepreneurial support ecosystem and interviewed me along with my team. Now, let me say up front, I didn't commission Ben to write what he did about Edinburgh, but I loved what he wrote. Ben wrote a white paper which assessed us as being Europe's leading and most joined up entrepreneurial support ecosystem. Ben referred to Brad Feld, an American author who had written a number of books, including Startup Communities. He said that there had to be 9 characteristics present for a successful entrepreneurial ecosystem. Those 9 are up there on your screen, and I'm going to go through each of these one by one and talk briefly about how we established success in those areas. His first one was leadership. And through the work that we had done between 2008 and 2016, leadership at the city level had got far more interested and far more involved in the day-to-day business of business support. From the Lord Provost, shown here, through the Chief Executive, we had established networks and forums whereby the chief executives within the city could meet and discuss entrepreneurship and how to best support it. We re-established something called the Edinburgh Economic Development Strategic Partnership, and that provided a forum for a range of partners at chief executive level. We brought the intermediaries together. Again, when we surveyed the landscape for intermediaries, now I'm talking about business support centres, accelerators and incubators, there were quite a number of incubators working in Edinburgh, but they weren't joined up. And I used the Creative Exchange to establish something called Interspace, Edinburgh Interspace, and that was an interconnection between the business space providers in the cities. And that was quite effective in establishing a system where we would share information about our clients rather than compete with one another, so that clients, depending on their business needs, could go to the centre that best met their needs at the time. Both Brad Feld and Ben Spiegel talked about network density. Now this diagram that's on your screen is practically unreadable, but that's the purpose of it. What this did was that this was Ben who had mapped out in our computer program all the various organisations that provided business support, and then drew a line between each of them if they were connected. And this was evidence-based. And as you can see from the diagram, it's a mess, but it's a good mess. It demonstrated that no one organisation was working any longer in isolation. There was no business support organisation in the city that was working in isolation, and that was down to some of the work that we did in convergence. At a national government level and a local government level, things were considerably improved from the picture that I first was presented with in 2008. So by 2016, government agencies were working much closer together and were more joined up. Likewise, through platforms such as the Economic Development Strategic Partnership, there was now a forum led by the Lord Provost that encouraged the universities to work more closely together and less in competition. And that was to the benefit of the academic and student population of the city. Support services were much more joined up. Ben found that the hub for entrepreneurship in Waverley Court, which was the council's headquarters, led by Business Gateway, didn't work in isolation. It was part of that smooth machine, the better connected entrepreneurial ecosystem. Engagements was rife. We had Creative Edinburgh, the fastest growing creative network, but we also, in parallel, established Edinburgh Tourism Action Group, Edinburgh Social Enterprise Network, and many others, so that each sector of the business community in Edinburgh had a network, and those networks themselves were interconnected. This photograph is of an event at the Creative Edinburgh, the Creative Exchange, where many different sector organisations came together. So there was true engagement between business and business support services, and business support services and government. And it was reflected in the success of the companies in Edinburgh at that time. And if you care to look at Ben's white paper, and I'll share a link at the end of the presentation, or Tanqui can circulate it, we were assessed as having the highest growth of unicorn companies, companies valued at more than $1 billion US. And we were ranked number 3 in the world. We were ahead of New York, Boston, and even places like Beijing. And we had established a better system for investment in Edinburgh. Edinburgh had, and still has, a strong and dense supportive community of venture capitalists, angel investors, and capital investors. But we worked hard to bring them together alongside the entrepreneurial ecosystem to provide better services and better access to capital investment streams. So I've talked local so far, but alongside these localized improvements to business support services, we had a motto in Edinburgh, and it's an illustration as you come into the council's headquarters on a plaque on the wall, and it says, "Act local, but think global." So we turned our attention also to international cities who we assessed as being similar to Edinburgh in terms of sectoral structures, not size, because Edinburgh is a very small city, a population of less than 500,000, and all these other cities listed here are much bigger. But what we looked for was similar status in the profile of sectors that were prevalent in each of those cities. So it gave us an idea that those cities would be good cities to partner with. So we reached out to Toronto, Munich, Mumbai, Abu Dhabi, and my favorite, Shenzhen. And it was to be the beginnings of my new life as an international business consultant, if you like. With Shenzhen, we built up a particularly strong and special relationship. I've been central to that part, to that relationship from the very beginning. So back in 2012, there was an agreement reached between Scottish government and Chinese government on a kind of special business relationship. By 2013, Shenzhen and Edinburgh had signed a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, which was to work towards providing reciprocal business support services in each of the cities. By 2015, we had established our 2 incubation centres in Shenzhen and Edinburgh. Remember the Creative Exchange? And by 2016, we were honoured with a visit from the Mayor of Shenzhen, who came to Edinburgh to celebrate the anniversary of the signing of our MOU and the opening of our 2 incubators. By 2017, we were frequent visitors to Edinburgh, and we were close to then discussing the next steps, which took place in 2019, when we signed a new international cities friendship agreement. When I say we, I literally mean we, because here's the Lord Provost of Edinburgh in Shenzhen and the Mayor of Shenzhen, obviously in Shenzhen, signing that very agreement. And there's 2 people in the audience that are very close to our hearts and close to the discussion today. There's myself. I was the co-author of the International Friendship Agreement, along with a colleague in Shenzhen. And I'm sure most of you, as members of the Doctorate Association, will recognise Dr. Zhang To Ma. Zhang To Ma and I are brothers. He addresses me as brother, and I address him as brother. We are both brothers and business partners. The Edinburgh Global Limited and the Doctorate Association have a key and central role in the continuing relationship between Edinburgh and Shenzhen. That includes a continuing presence in both cities for Edinburgh and Shenzhen and Edinburgh. We continue to work together to provide business support for companies from Scotland that want to settle in Shenzhen and vice versa. So, you've had a whistle-stop tour of my life from white mice to international success. I can't claim credit for everything that happened in Edinburgh between 2008 and 2019, whilst I was head of enterprise and innovation. That would be folly, and it would be foolish of me to do so. Global economic factors, including the recovery that followed 2008 and the banking sector crash, created a tsunami of success on which Edinburgh surfed. And it led to much more favourable economic conditions. However, in my own modest way, I think I did a lot to bring services together, to strengthen networks and to ensure that business support and a stronger entrepreneurial ecosystem was in place by the end of my tenure in 2019 than had been in the case when I took up the challenge in 2008. So it was with some pride, therefore, and a proper sense of achievement when I was invited to London recently to be presented with Entrepreneurial City of the Year award. And here I am, resplendent in my kilt, picking up the award alongside the MP for Edinburgh and some of the business leaders from Edinburgh. So yes, it started off with white mice and it ended up with Entrepreneurial City of the Year. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Jim. It was a wonderful talk. And you showed us an intuitive history of government approaches in Scotland for supporting business. And it is from a perspective of a local person who really participated in it. It's very interesting. Okay, now I think we have time for a few questions. People who like to ask questions can unmute themselves and start to talk.
Hello.
Hello, Alice.
Hi, Jim. It's Alice. We've met actually quite a few times before when I was
Yes.
hosting the events. It's
Yeah, nice to see you.
absolutely wonderful to have you here today. I've learned so much from your sharing, your discovering of your own entrepreneurship, your extensive work experience, and it's mind blowing. I've actually worked in so many different areas, business-wise, the public sector. It's just so much richness. And actually, I'm so glad you mentioned the place strategy. Interestingly, my husband and I got into the property business during the pandemic. So there's been a lot of refurbish work going on. And when you said your mom had put you in a playpen with the puppies, I can see my daughter in a playpen when the both of us are working. So it's like really connectable. And the thing is, so now we know much more about the spaces in Edinburgh, may it be commercial, residential. And my husband is a scientist in chemical engineering. He works in Edinburgh University, who's in the process of establishing a business on research and development lab for longevity supplements. And we were just talking about the other day, Edinburgh is a very expensive city. You talked about the creative industry, etc. But for academics like him, who wants to do startup, it's very difficult to find a place where it's suitable for lab space within the city. So they were actually thinking about the outskirts, the central belt, etc. So do you have any suggestions for that or any directions on that? Things?
Yeah, there used to be a grouping of science parks called Edinburgh Science Triangle.
Okay.
So these are science parks that are dotted around the outskirts of Edinburgh. So it's in Mid Lothian and East Lothian. So, for example, the Roslin Institute is part of the new investment there. So I can look into it. I've been away for it from a couple of years, so I don't know who's actually in charge of the Edinburgh Science Triangle now, and it's not called the Science Triangle anymore. But there was at the time when I was with Edinburgh that collective, and they have lab space that's supposedly affordable in each of these areas. And their specialisms. So, for example, I referred to Summer Hall, where the veterinary school moved to the outskirts of the city. That was part of that investment. So they call it the Bush, Easter Bush. Is the new site for the veterinary school, but the Roslin Institute is specialism in sort of agriculture. Science, and there's other specialist parks. So it might be that your husband can find space either out there. It's one of the quandaries as an economic development leader in Edinburgh. You want the city to be successful, but you don't want it to be so successful that it prices itself out the market. Yeah, and the place issue has got to that stage now, where for startup businesses it's very difficult to find affordable space. So Edinburgh Science Triangle was an attempt at fixing that. But I can send if you
we're on LinkedIn. So
if we're in LinkedIn, so remind me of your query, and I'll see if I can find out more about the science parks.
Thank you.
Okay.
Also, just a related note. So when people talk about Glasgow and Edinburgh, they think of Glasgow perhaps as the more industrial city, and Edinburgh as the more, liberal arts, human and creative industry. Yeah. So what do you think that? Do you think there's like a change that, or?
Well, I think there's always been a kind of friendly rivalry between Glasgow and Edinburgh. And for people from outside the cities, it's outside of Scotland, and find it difficult to understand because there's only 38 miles between one and the other. For a nation like of China or the US, that's nothing. It's like it's the same city. but there's always been this this rivalry. And you know, in days gone by, you would say that Edinburgh was the brains of Scotland and Glasgow was the brawn, you know, because all the manufacturing and the main ports and export, etc., came from sort of Glasgow, whereas Edinburgh was much more of an intellectual base, and you know, education, academia, medicine, and all that came out of Edinburgh. But I think now there's much more of an inclination to just look at the central belt of Scotland, because you know it's connected by 45 minutes in the train, and we shouldn't be thinking about rivalry. We should be talking about how do we collaborate. Right. But if somebody from Glasgow hears me saying that Edinburgh is the brains and Glasgow is the brawn, then they'll take offence. So I apologise. That's an old expression. I think we work much more closely now.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
And certainly the pandemic has brought up a lot of changes in the way we commute and the way we, go to work and just live our daily basis.
Yes.
And is there any advice for people such as myself included who are in the process of looking for like a real job, and advice on how that has raised challenges and changes to business?
Yeah, well, I think the more physical the enterprise is, the more reliant it is, and the more vulnerable it is to the pandemic limitations. So if you're in property, for example, you can't make that virtual. It's about bricks and mortars. However, knowledge-based and digital businesses have actually thrived. If you look at the share price of Zoom before and after the pandemic, it just skyrocketed. So there have been opportunities, but the opportunities rest in the digital virtual world, not in the real world. I think there will be a rapid recovery when you consider. I've studied economics through centuries in economic history. The flu pandemic in the 1918s was preceded by the end of World War I, of course, but we had a roaring 1920s where there was rapid growth, rapid investment, rapid recovery. Same after World War II in the 1945, 1955 through to the 60s, there was a rapid recovery. So, I think the wise people, the prudent people, will be operating currently in the digital realm, but have investment in physical infrastructure ready for the next boom.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just give the opportunity to other people. Thanks.
Okay.
Hi, Jim. Thank you for the wonderful talk. I'm Bo from, I work actually at Glasgow Uni.
Hi. Well, hope you're not offended by what I said about Glasgow there.
No problem. Fully understand. So yeah, it's great to see a interconnected strategy for entrepreneurs support. So I just want to ask, do you see there's any opportunity coming from the Brexit and the COVID? And do you know if there is any city level strategy and even national level strategy from Scotland for the coming changes?
Oh, very interesting question, and I would probably need to take a week to think about it and another hour to answer it comprehensively. Yeah, but to me, Brexit and COVID certainly offer more threats and opportunities. I think we're only now beginning to see some of the impact of Brexit, and nobody could have anticipated COVID coming along at the same time as Brexit. So there's a double whammy. But again, you know, within every tragedy, there's an opportunity. I think that's the word for entrepreneurship in Chinese is it tragic opportunity, something like that. So out of tragedy comes opportunity, and you know, I think that there is an opportunity for much more domestic production, if you like. There's a new wave of markets for kind of these artisan products. I've seen in my own town, my small village, you know, the regeneration of a high street that was dead before with artisan bakers, artisan spice providers. I think the green issue, the global warming and international, you know, concerns around environmental change is driving a new green industry as well. So there's a whole range of opportunities for domestic ranged products and services at a micro and a macro level. COVID again has forced us to look at different ways of working, more efficient ways of working, working from home. As we're emerging out of it, many employers are looking at a continuing range of working patterns, and that's changing the nature of city centres. And that's going to be an ongoing challenge, but again, an opportunity for people that are working in property to say, well, how can we refunction some of these properties and so forth. So yeah, it's a very good question, and not one that I would have an instant answer to, but there's my initial thoughts. Yep.
Yeah, because I'm hoping to hear if there's any strategic preparation already going on. And
well, I'm sure there is. Certainly when I was still with the council, I was the economic development lead for business resilience, and we had various plans and strategies and theoretic books about, you know, what do we do if there's a pandemic hits. But I left in 2019, and maybe fortunate for me as an individual, I didn't have then the burden of responsibility to actually see. But you know, there's something about you know, business support services that says to businesses, you know, what is your resilience strategy? You know, have you reviewed your business function in light of the new business environment and the circumstances? How can you diversify? How can you still reach your customers? How can you adapt your products? So those are the sorts of business strategies that, you know, form the basis of a resilience strategy, and those are amplified in the council as well. So I know that there's a whole range of resources has been put into the council's resilience team that weren't there before. But you know, I'm no longer a part of that, and I'm, you know, to some extent, I'm quite happy that I got out before the COVID hit the fan, if you know what I mean. Yeah.
Can I just ask one small question? I think it might be a bit easier to answer. So if any of us as in the Doctorate Association or just the researchers in general interested in setting up a business or startup, what's your advice on where to start at?
Well,
what services to approach?
Well, I think there's no better service than Business Gateway. So Business Gateway is there to help anybody with a startup idea, and it has a whole range of resources that are completely free, and they can be quite basic. So for example, if a PhD student wants to set up something science-based, it's you know, the basic structure is there for a business plan template, but it does actually make you think in a business-like way, just to go through some of their templates. So they'll talk about, minimum feasible product, market analysis, financial models, investment and return on investment. Those sort of simple, basic building blocks of business. So I would start with Business Gateway, just have a read through some of the literature. But you know, as PhD students, you know, as part of the university networks, I know certainly in Edinburgh University, there's fantastic centres for entrepreneurship. The King's Buildings in Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Innovations, they provide support. There's a cost to pay, because there's sometimes an equity share goes to the university. But you know, that's another good place to start. And then through the modest efforts of Edinburgh Global Limited as well, you know, through the Doctorate Association, I'm available as a mentor to anybody that's got a business idea, and it's free at the outset. And then, you know, if it goes on beyond a particular length of time, then there's a modest charge that I would take as a consultant.
That's great. Thank you very much, Jim.
No problem. Yeah. Okay.
Hi, Mr. Galloway.
Hi.
I'm John from
John.
Aludis Technology. We do synthetic biology. Well, I am an undergraduate student from the University of Edinburgh, still an undergraduate because I came back to China due to pandemic. Actually, I'm from Shenzhen, so it's like tied up already. Yeah. And actually, our company, my startup, went into Y Combinator while the China branch before, and we finished fundraising more than if we turn to pound, it's more than £2 million already. So I got like 3 questions. One is about lab space back in Edinburgh. Well, you just mentioned about the like the science triangles, and I did add you on. I did send the invitation on LinkedIn. So perhaps if you pass the invitation, maybe we can discuss a bit more about like how's the science triangle working. Another one is that we are quite interested in starting a overseas like a branch or overseas agencies. So Edinburgh is one of the top choice for us, but like we are still wondering like if we want to start such kind of like overseas branch, since we are a company in Shenzhen, how do we like get started with? Like where do we look into like policies, informations, or like regulations, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And the third one is that about synthetic biology itself, because I don't know if you heard about it when you were in the city council before, since Shenzhen and Edinburgh are quite tied up in a friendly city, and Shenzhen is now having the biggest synthetic biology research center in the world. And I personally have a really good connection with the director of that institution. And he was my mentor in some way when I was in high school. So I am wondering that if we can actually start such kind of like a small incubator around like biotech between like Edinburgh and Shenzhen, because we got lots of like culture and creative incubation. But I think maybe technology exchanges or like I don't know, incubation might be a fun stuff to do. And
okay. Yeah. So very quickly, going through your questions then. So the lab space, was that you looking for lab space here in Edinburgh or in Shenzhen?
If we want to have a branch back in Edinburgh, then we might need some like lab spaces. Okay. Yeah, we already have lab in Shenzhen right now, so that's cool.
That's okay. Yeah. Okay, so let me. I can approach either Edinburgh Science Triangle or one of the universities. Might be a good starting point for that. Certainly, if it's lab space, then you need specialised, you know, kind of premises, of course. So maybe what I would suggest, if we take this offline and you send me some kind of background papers, I can then do some research on your behalf and see if there's premises that suit your needs.
Yeah.
Certainly overseas agencies, we and I, Edinburgh Global Limited, work with a number of international solicitor firms. So again, if you send me some information, of kind of the scope and size of the agency that you would want to set up here, then we can certainly help you with that through the legal services. And then, you know, I think Edinburgh is very keen to enter into new research projects, and I could certainly introduce you to the right people in the right organisations and institutes if you wanted to explore that, and we could do that on the back of the existing International Friendship Cities Agreement. I don't know if Jean Thomas with us in the meeting. It might be a good idea. He's in Shenzhen.
I know him. Yeah, we are quite
right,
good
okay.
friends. Yeah,
So
because he's in biology as well. Yeah.
You need to have a chat with Jiang To and talk to him about what you're doing in Shenzhen, and then he and I can have a discussion about how best to support you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, good stuff.
Yeah, I think let's now for the last question.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I see there's somebody. Winston's got his hand up. Is that right?
Yes.
Kung Fu Panda. Hi, Winston.
Hey, hello, Jim.
Hi.
Can you see me?
Yes, I can see you. Yeah. Nice to see you.
You can see Kung Fu Panda or see myself?
No, I can see you. I can see you now.
Okay. All right. Thank you for sharing with us your experience.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Winston. I am an alumni of the Master of Entrepreneurship and Innovation program of the business school. So Dr. Ben Spiegel had taught us one course related to fintech.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in the business school from 2017 to 2018. After I returned to China, I came to Hangzhou, so-called the capital of e-commerce in China. So now I have my own startup in the e-commerce supply chain business. So my question is, we all know China is very advanced in e-commerce industry. And China as a whole market is very, a fantastic place to run different experiments related to product, market, platform, business model, etc. So my question to you would be, what do you see in the future, how Edinburgh could work with a city such as Hangzhou? You know, we have a lot of resources in e-commerce, how we can leverage those resources to help Edinburgh to become the capital of e-commerce in the UK?
Well, it's a very good question. I think we've, for the last 5 years, had a very close relationship with Shenzhen, and you know, there have been some opportunities explored, but not fully exploited, if you like. And I think you've hit on a really key point, is that, you know, that there's a lot of collaboration platforms established between China and Scotland and China.
Right.
And I'm always very keen to see some kind of output, you know, and a proper outcome that can be valued and measured and quantified and qualified. So yeah, I think there's an awful lot of opportunity around e-commerce. I think Scotland is well behind China in its shopping habits. I think we still quite like to go out to see things and touch things before we buy them.
Right.
And e-commerce is an emerging industry here in the UK. We have invested a lot of resource and time in digital innovation here in the city, and the council's new strategy is around digital innovation, but it's more about data and data capacity and data use. So I think there are opportunities, but I don't have an answer to your question about how we would take that forward. If you have some ideas that you would like me to find partners for in Edinburgh, then that might be something that we could explore again offline. And you maybe I think we're going to share my email address and so forth. I think it's already shared, so that you can get in touch directly with me, or I'm on WeChat. You can find me on WeChat as well.
Right.
And we can start sharing some of our ideas. The tagline for my new company, Edinburgh Global Limited, is about making connections and getting things done. Because some of my frustration whilst in local government was we talked a lot, but we didn't actually achieve a great deal on the ground, or not as much on the ground as we might have done. So I'm keen to explore areas where you think we could actually achieve something. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much.
I'm not sure if I've answered your question, because I don't have an answer to it, I suppose is what I'm saying, but I'm willing to explore where we could exploit some of the opportunities. Yeah.
Yes, sure, definitely. I think many cities in China is a very good experiment ground for entrepreneurship. Such as Hangzhou, I've talked to many businessmen and governmental officials. They are very welcoming people with skills, with entrepreneurial experience to come to the city of Hangzhou to fund their own business. Also, Shenzhen is a very ideal place for such an activity as well. Yeah. And vice versa. I think alumni from the University of Edinburgh, if they have a business idea, they would want to start up a business, they should, if they must choose a city, I think Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Hangzhou would be the wise choice.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Winston.
Thank you very much for the questions. Yeah, because we have talked for 1.5 hours. Very long.
Yes, indeed.
And let's thank Jim again for his excellent talk, patiently answering questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and by the way, the Doctorate Association is recruiting volunteers to join our service team to support our daily works and events. And if you are interested in, please follow WeChat public account, 博士联盟 Doctorate Association. And thank everyone come to this talk, and we will have more talks later in this year. And please keep tuned, and see you next time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.